Hi, music fans. I'm Cary Ginell, and I will be your host for a very fascinating series of lectures called The Lost Art of Instrumental Music. Now, there was a time in American history, um, basically between the 1950s and the 1970s, when people listened to music without words. And a lot of this pervaded our consciousness, even though we really didn't recognize it. There were obvious elements where music hit the pop charts, but other times when it was just there all the time. Sometimes it was in cartoons, sometimes on television, sometimes on film, but these became very familiar parts of our society. And it started in the 1950s. So we're going to be starting with a lecture called Musical Miniatures. And this introduces us to I'm going to introduce you to composers who would write small pieces. Classical music, of course, is larger works, longer works. And so what these people were doing, these composers were writing miniature symphonies, 2 or 3 minutes, around a specific theme. For example, Leroy Anderson. Everybody knows his sleigh ride, but Leroy Anderson wrote a number of these instrumental miniatures that became very popular and were used in commercials and television shows as well. The syncopated clock was used as the theme song for The Late Late Show, a nightly motion picture that was on television, etc. And we'll also look at Raymond Scott, one of the pioneers of instrumental music, who used a small group of jazz musicians to create very unusual and futuristic kinds of instrumentation. Ross Bagdasarian, is known as his alter ego, David Seville, with the Chipmunks, was also a very creative instrumentalist. And then Carl Stalling, who was the genius behind all of the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes cartoons, putting together familiar songs and melodies to be included with the cartoons that he helped score. So that we'll be focusing on those composers in week one. Week two is called Mood Music and Sonic Explosions, and we have a variety of different things that we're going to be focusing on, mostly from the 1950s and early 1960s. And it was no coincidence that this music came to the forefront as technology was increasing and getting more elaborate in recording studios. Stereo was introduced in the late 1950s, as well as use of recording tape. And so some of these composers would create exotic sounds and elaborate percussion ensembles in order to accentuate the separation between right and left channel. So we'll be talking about that and playing music by such pioneers as Les Baxter, Percy Faith, Martin Denny. You might not know the names, but you certainly know the music. And then in the last part of that lecture, we'll be talking about an instrumental form of rock and roll that was very popular between about 1960 and 1964. So it started after the initial rock and roll rage died down, and on the other end, when the Beatles took over the pop charts. And I'm talking about surf music, a very specific kind of music focusing on the electric guitar that was developed on the West Coast by such people as Dick Dale and Dwayne Eddy, and then influenced the start of the Beach Boys' career. So we'll be talking about surf music as the last part of week two. Week three, we go into television as we present television theme songs. You don't find that very much anymore. The content starts right after the credits, and there wasn't time for any melodic themes. But these were pervasive throughout television in the early part of the 1960s, especially. There were a lot of television theme songs that featured lyrics, but a lot of the most memorable ones did not. And what I'm going to be doing is separating the songs by genres. We'll be talking about police shows such as Dragnet and Hawaii Five-O, westerns like Bonanza and the Wild Wild West, secret agent shows like The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Mission Impossible, private eyes like Perry Mason and Ironside, and so on and so forth. Other categories include science fiction shows, situation comedies, and kids shows. And then in the final week, we'll be talking about the same kind of thing, only with relation to motion picture themes. Again, separating them into categories: adventure movies, Around the World in 80 Days, Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. Alfred Hitchcock especially was very conscious of using music in his movies. We'll be talking about Psycho, for instance, in some of the one of the great horror films of the 1960s. Other categories include romance films such as The Summer Place. The theme from The Summer Place actually topped the charts in 1960. Comedy films. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World was a sensation, as was The Pink Panther. Thrillers such as the James Bond series beginning and Henry Mancini's Afro-Cuban score for Touch of Evil. And of course, the many historical epics that took place. Ben-Hur and Patton and Spartacus, a lot of those as well. So that encompasses our first 4 weeks. I think you'll be delighted by the music that you might have remembered uh, back when it was around and had forgotten since then. And maybe you might be introduced to some that you haven't heard, and will encourage you to explore that kind of music as well. So please join me for the lost art of instrumental music, and Christina will be telling you when that will start.